Shits and Giggles, embarrassing stories and personal growth. Hello and welcome to the next episode of Shits and Giggles, a new show brought to you by Gali Health. My name is Jackie Zimmerman and I am a long-term IBD patient currently living with a J pouch. I've been doing this a really long time, over a decade now, and I know there have been at least a few embarrassing moments in my time here. And those of us living with IBD know that despite all the rumors, this isn't the glitz and glam that some might think it is. So I think that we all live through these embarrassing moments and we don't always talk about them. And I think that it's really helpful to talk about them. It's beneficial for you, it's beneficial for me. And hopefully by the end of it, we come out feeling like slightly better about what happened. So that's the goal of this show. We're going to talk about embarrassing stuff. I have another guest, another lovely person from across the very large pond. This is my guest today, Luke, and I'm going to let Luke tell you a little bit about Luke.
Oh, hello. Yes, thanks, Jackie. I'm Luke. I'm Luke Escombe. I'm coming to you from my music room at my house in Sydney, Australia. It's summer here, and let's see. I grew up in London. My dad was in the rock and roll business, and so I sort of carried on a little bit in that vein. I got Crohn's when I was 14, which was quite a long time ago now. I can't. Sometime in the early 90s.
Math not required.
Kurt Cobain was still alive, and I had a really tough time in my teens. Not so much with the illness, but just like the mental side of things after the illness and the way it changed my body and my relationship with myself. And then I moved to Sydney when I was in my early 20s and kind of fell in love with the city and with one of its beautiful women, and got married, and I'm still married 20 years this year. And I thought the IBD was behind me, but it came back a couple of times in my 20s and had me housebound for a few years, actually. And I learned a lot through all of that experience. And in 2011, I put together like a musical comedy show called Chronic, which I took to the Melbourne Comedy Festival and then to the Edinburgh Fringe in Scotland. And I talked a little bit about some of my experiences in that show. And that led to me becoming a keynote speaker and an advocate. And I found the more that I spoke about my illness and the more that I was sort of funny about it or kind of used it as material, I started to get a lot better as well. My mental health got a lot better, my emotional health, and eventually my physical health. And I had an ileostomy in 2012 and have been sort of living without any symptoms or medication since then. So yeah, it's been a long haul.
High five. We've talked quite a few times over the last couple of years, but I have to say that in that little intro, I learned more about you in that little intro than I think that I have the entire time that I've known you.
That's good. Yeah, it's the potted history. It's funny how often you end up telling your story and it's never quite the same each time.
So you've had Crohn's for a long time, and I've always been really thankful that I didn't develop IBD until a little bit later. I was 23 or 24 when I was diagnosed, and I feel like those early years have got to be rough, right? When you're a teenager, you're just trying to be a teenager, and then you have this on top of that. That was probably not a particularly fun time.
Yeah, well, I was waiting for puberty to show up because it hadn't happened yet, and you become very aware of that going to an all boys school and in the changing rooms and everything. And I'm very tall. I'm like 6'6", and I was a tall kid, and then I kind of stopped growing, and suddenly I was still a little boy at 14, where there were these hulking men now in the locker room with me, and instead of puberty showing up, Crohn's disease showed up. So that was not what I was hoping for. And
can't win them all, right?
Yeah, it was not a good time to suddenly go back to school after 6 weeks of hospital with that prednisone kind of hamster cheeks and acne. And I'd been like doing really well at school. I was like a captain of the school, and I was writing my own plays, and I was in a band, and I was in the sports team, and all of that kind of ended. Like I stopped being that person, and I couldn't really kind of connect with the new person I was. So I sort of had to invent this person that was not very popular. Really, I think, like, I've spoken about this a lot more recently because I'm still coming to terms with it. But I think the loneliness of those last few years of high school, even though I wasn't actually physically particularly ill at that point, I was kind of in remission. But the loneliness was the most painful thing I've been through.
I feel like so
Yeah.
many of us process like years after, because like my theory is that you can only be well and really really well in one area, either like mentally or physically, when you live with a chronic illness. I have never been able to do both at the same time, and if one is really bad, the other one like tries to hang in there. And so for me, when I was really really physically sick, my mental health was uh following behind shortly. And then when I was physically healthy, my mental health was like, oh, hey, remember all that terrible shit that happened? Let's think
Mm.
about that for a really long time. So yeah, I think it's awful. It's almost like reliving it over, but in the way that where you just overprocess it over and over and over again. It's almost worse, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's
Yeah,
just
I
me
mean, I think
projecting.
I've spoken to sort of victims of childhood trauma as well, whether it's abuse or whatever, and it's often the case that it might take 20 years for that trauma to kind of come out, or like it's been subtly working away at you for a long time, but finally it's just there. You have to deal with it at a certain point in your life. But
Woof.
yeah, I found that too, where some of my most amazing mental health times have been when I'm the sickest. You know, I've really had that moment where I felt like I achieved nirvana. You know, I was reading like the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and it was my wife had been to India and got this book from a guru that was all about like manifesting the reality, the inner reality out in the world. And I felt like I'd got there. I was in a state of bliss, but also very close to death at that point. And I had to kind of decide, like, do I just sustain this state of bliss right into the grave, or do I now go to hospital and go through all the tubes and the medications and kind of like
Oh,
burst the bubble? And I'm very glad I did decide to go to hospital and everything, but I still kind of I still have a sort of aspirational feeling about that time, that when it is my time, and hopefully that's many decades hence, that I'll be able to get back to some level of that acceptance of my mortality. And yeah, I mean that's the thing about IBD, and why I've been able to write about it and give so many talks about it, is that you just learn so much about life through having to face your own body trying to do you in.
yeah, it's I would call it a party. It's a real party,
Hmm.
living with IBD, super fun all the time. Party of one most of the time, because it's pretty isolating. But let's talk about embarrassing stories. So I've asked you to prepare one or 20, whatever, because I'm sure you have a slew, just like all of us do. If there was one that you'd like to share, I would love to hear it. The juicier, the better.
Yeah, look, I might tell you about a time. This was in 2011, and I'd just done my comedy show at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. And it was the first time I got reviews, and I got like my first ever review. It was like literally opening the paper, like, do I have a career or not? And it was quite a good review, and I was really relieved. And so I briefly had some confidence, and I decided to take the show to the Edinburgh Fringe. And I went over to Edinburgh, and it was very tough. I was there on my own. I was doing a show sometimes to two or three people, and halfway through my stay there, my apartment was robbed, and I got my passport stolen, and my iPad and my
Oh
credit
my
cards and everything. So
God.
it was tough. And Edinburgh doesn't have an Australian consulate. Well, it has an Australian consulate in the back of a furniture showroom, where there's one lady with like a picture of the Australian Prime Minister, like at the barbecue. Um, and she couldn't help me get a new Aussie passport, so I had to go down to London for the day, where they have the Australian consulate in the Strand, and it's a big building with all these weird statues of naked men on it, with big stone carved penises looking down over like a very posh part of London.
As they
It's,
do.
oh, Australia, fantastic.
That's what I
And
think of.
it was a really terrible time to be in London, because it was a couple of weeks after the London riots of 2011. And this, I mean, we've had so much crazy shit go on in the world, like it's easy to forget the London riots, but it was quite a big thing. And there were sort of street battles between, I guess, the sort of disaffected youths who were being cleaned out of these areas where they were building the Olympic venues, and the cops, and all of that sort of stuff that we're quite familiar with nowadays. And it was just an incredibly hostile environment in London. There were riot police everywhere, and people just staring daggers. Like everyone was in a much worse mood than they normally are in London. And it was one of those years where summer just didn't happen, which is one of the reasons I left England. Like some years it's June, you think, all right, we'll just give it another couple of weeks. It's July, it still hasn't happened. It's August, and then suddenly it's October again. And it's raining and it's cold, and you're like, what happened? What? So I got my new passport from the Strand, and I got hit with this urgency. I really needed to go, and I was right in the middle of town, and there was like a public toilet just across the road from the Strand. It was one of those like automatic sliding door toilets,
like out in the street kind.
Yeah, like it was like a sort of Doctor Who type booth.
I've seen these on the internets. I don't think we have these here.
Yeah, they're sort of like ultra sophisticated toilets of the future, but designed back in the 50s. And the ones in England, you need to have a very specific coin. You needed a 50 pence piece, which I didn't have. I didn't have the right coin, and I really needed to go. And this was a problem. And I was just sort of hanging outside the door, just hoping for a miracle. And like suddenly the door slid open, and the lady that was in there came out, and the door was open, and there was the toilet that I really needed. So I just went in there. I thought, well, it'll close behind me, and I'll be able to kind of do what I need to do. Like, it's not a crime. And I walked in, and the door closed, and I sort of had my pants half like down to my ankles, and I hadn't got started yet. But it's like when you find the toilet, it's such a relief. You want to sit in that relief for a little bit, like, yes, I did it. And then like this red light started flashing, and the door just slid open on the street, and there were riot cops right outside the door, and I'm like with my pants around my ankles, and I didn't know what to do at that point. I just go, well, I just do it, and to hell with it. And I still have that British embarrassment about things like this. So I decided, look, I quickly pulled up my pants, and I had to find my way across like 2 blocks to find a pub to go in, and finally did it. But
wait, you were able to like stop?
I hadn't quite started. I was able to reassert that sort of insane sphincter control that
I am so impressed right now, because I know for me, when I'm doing the like it's time, and then I finally get where I'm going, there's not really an off valve at that moment. It's like, we're here. We made it.
That's what I thought. But when there's a bunch of armed riot police outside the door, and you're essentially trying to steal a shit off the UK, like the London Council or whoever owns that toilet. It was very weird. Like I had to make a very snap decision. And
so is there like a sensor on the toilet that knows you didn't pay, and then
it must have known that I didn't pay the money?
That is quite sophisticated, I must say.
Quite and quite diabolical, really.
Right, it's pretty terrible.
Yeah. Because they get so worried about toilets in England that they might be used, like, a homeless person might use it to get changed.
Heaven forbid, right?
Yeah, like someone might use it for something. Like, there's nothing worse than what I was gonna use it for. I was gonna destroy the thing. But the funny thing about it is that ended up being the second verse of a rap song I wrote called Master Key. Where I made a music video. I made a sort of a spoof kind of gangster rap video about public toilet access. And I used that whole story as the second verse of that song. And so in the end, it was one of the really terrible stories. And there was another one I could have told you that's even worse that I'm not going to, because I'm still, I don't want to incriminate myself about it. But those ones... Now I've got to the point where I know pretty soon after, once the immediate trauma has worn off, I know that I've got something here. This is some
This is
really good
material.
material. This is
Yeah.
like, this is so, anything that you're absolutely mortified to tell another person about, especially if it involves toilets and riot police and anything like that, you know that you've got some gold.
Toilets,
Um,
I know a couple IBD comedians. Justin Berkman was my first guest. And there's, when you have a butt disease, you have an endless slew of funny things to laugh at. But I've never had anybody have the trump card of riot police on top of it. That's a
mm.
real that's a real gold star story right there.
There were so many things that had to go wrong for me to even be in that situation.
Oh, and I'm just picturing it now, and it's so I want there to be like a movie short on it. I want this to be a scene out of like a rom-com somewhere because it's I want to see it happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
not all of it, but you know what I mean.
I still remember it. I still remember it like it was yesterday. But yeah, I'm a very, you can't make that stuff up. Or I can't. I don't have a very good imagination. So like all the terrible stuff I talk about in my keynotes and comedy shows or whatever, like that's all happened to me. And in the end, it's a gift because I couldn't make it up. And I don't know how you would,
Well, I
why
think
you would
that's
put your
the
mind through that sort of process of putting yourself in those scenarios.
it's one of the things I love the most about comedy and watching stand-up comics is a lot of comics are people who are, they're quiet in their normal lives. They're relatively introverted, maybe they're shy, but then they get on stage and they tell these stories that of things that have happened in their lives that no one should be talking about for the most part. This is Chicken Nugget.
Oh,
Um, and that's the best part about comedy is, and my husband and I watch a lot of comedy and we talk a lot. Some things like ridiculous things will happen in our lives and we'll be like, put that on our stand-up set because some you can't make up the best comedy is stuff you can't make up. It's all stuff that had to have happened by some series of terrible events because the human brain can't come up with some of the awful things, especially things that like people with IBD have had to live through, myself included.
And on the sort of therapeutic side of it, embarrassment and shame are terrible things to live with. They're burdens that you carry around, and the weight of those burdens affects other parts of the system. And the best way to just let go of it is to turn it into something light. You turn shame into comedy, and not only do you get rid of the shame, but you actually you gain from it. You sort of get you've converted it into positive energy. And the great thing is you can keep going around, like if you are sort of doing a stand-up tour or whatever, you can get those laughs every night. Like every time you can be sort of renewed and buoyed up by this. So you only suffer the bad thing once, but then you can get the good effects hundreds of times.
See, that's why it's so beneficial to tell your story.
Totally.
That's
Totally.
like we need to put that on a meme somewhere. You can suffer through it one time, but
that's
then
what the internet needs. More memes.
More
People
memes.
not using their. Let's just see if we can use that Ghanaian troll farm the Russians are using to destroy U.S. democracy, and just put some more positive Crohn's memes in there.
I mean, I would contribute to like a GoFundMe for it, probably.
Yeah. Why not? Let's put them to good use. Exactly.
Luke, a pleasure as always. And I think that you bring a really unique perspective in terms of how to turn all like you just said, like turning something because you can laugh or you can cry about it. There's really no in between, unless you just don't admit that it happened. But then if you're a fan of Brene Brown like I am, she talks about the shame spiral and shame storms and all of these things, and you can't get over it until you go through it. And I love the approach that you take. And I think there's so many things that people who are really struggling with IBD and the things that happen as a result of having IBD that could learn from your approach. Just because you unapologetically talk about what has happened, how it's happened, and how you process it. And you are your authentic self, including IBD, and it's a joy to watch and be around. And actually, this is a perfect segue that I didn't even mean to do.
Hey, yes. Quick, let's plug the book or the movie.
You have a thing A
in
thing
theaters
coming
this
up.
fall. Yeah, yeah, I
What's your
do.
thing?
My thing, well, we're calling it a podcast because you listen to it. So let's call it a podcast. It's called Chronic, which is the name of my show. I don't know how good the camera is here, but that little poster there is actually my Chronic poster from the Edinburgh Fringe. So this is basically like Chronic was. I say that I had a comedy show about IBD. It's not really true. I had basically a musical comedy show and a few little jokes about some of my hospital experiences that then opened the door into keynote speaking, which I've been doing for the last 9 years, and MC stuff and going around. And I've amassed hours and hours of material, like this about these embarrassing stories or about, ways I dealt with loneliness as a teenager, but also my family story and love story and all of that. And I sort of started writing an autobiography at the beginning of the year, and then it just
No big
seemed too
deal.
big. And I thought, well, what can I do with this material? And then Gali just sort of invited me to do something. Like, we want you to do something. And I thought about like, what do I want to do? And I've always wanted to be able to use the Chronic material and do something cool with it. But I've never really had the resources to do it, and no one has ever wanted to give me that creative freedom. They've always wanted to like, well, okay, well, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about this, and I want to talk about all of it. I don't want to be told I can't talk about, I like stuff that I honestly feel and I feel I need to talk about. So yeah, Gali have supported me to make this audio series that, I think of it, to me, it's like my Netflix show. So IBD is a part of it, but it's also a story about someone following their dreams across the world and falling in love and being part of this long chain of interesting people that made interesting decisions in their lives and going through really tough experiences in hospital and having embarrassing stories, but also my own journeys into the realm of conspiracy theories and alternative health and all of that stuff. I talk about all of it, and it's produced by my producer who helps me with my albums, ARIA nominated producer. And so we have original music in there, we have sound effects, we have all sorts of atmosphere. It's really well produced, and so it's kind of like a cinematic experience when you listen to it. So it's not just kind of talking about IBD, it's a story, and IBD is I guess the main villain in the story. But it's more about just all of the dimensions of your humanity that get revealed when you have to engage with a lifelong struggle like living with IBD. And so I've done the first 3 episodes, and they're going to be on the Gali app in just before Christmas, I think. And we're still, I think, just figuring out exactly how they're going to be accessible on the app. But there'll be 3 before Christmas and then another 2 sort of in January, and then we'll see from there. Hopefully people will listen and enjoy it, and I'll get to do more because I've really enjoyed writing them and kind of taking this material and taking it, much further, like going deeper into it. And some of it's funny, some of it is more philosophical. Some of it hopefully is very moving as well. Some of the music and sound effects are talking about authentic. I don't know. I'm gonna reveal this. There are some fart noises in the 3rd episode where I talk about how one of the obstacles to me getting diagnosed was that I was growing up in Britain where we just didn't talk about bottoms or farts. So like one of the boys in my class actually got given a detention once for farting. So we were a generation of boys that learned to hold them in. But we needed some funny sound effects in this section, and my producer had just happened about 20 or 30 years earlier to have recorded a week's worth of his own actual farts on a dictaphone and had recently digitized them. And so he had access. So we would listen through to like 30 original on location farts recorded at some point in the 90s and try to feel like, and each one would be completely unique and different in terms of its tone and resonance. And like, there'd be a squeaky bit, and we had to sort of listen through and find the right ones for that particular moment. So those farts are not like someone making a fart noise or farts like generically downloaded off YouTube. These are my producer's actual like wind coming out of his anus.
They're vintage too,
They
which
are
makes them cooler already.
Yeah, and he was like, I digitized this a week ago, thinking, why am I doing this? I'm never going to use them. And then I walk in and go, Mike, guess what? Um, so, for me, that's just a great piece of audio rescue. And a real validation for that young man's decisions to document a week's worth of flatulence, not knowing, that it might inspire people in the year 2020 in the distant future.
Yeah. And if there's anything to talk about inspiration in the year of 2020, it's definitely a fart noise.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
absolutely. And maybe other people will do that now with their phones, and we'll have
we'll have a
an enormous kind of archive.
maybe it'll be like the new
Even,
Facebook. Oh, there was an episode of Letterkenny. Do you ever watch that show?
don't think I've seen it. I've heard the name.
I swear I could be making this up, but I swear they had an episode called Fart Book, and it was like Facebook
Wow.
but for farts. And
Wow.
so maybe that will really happen now. Um,
Yeah.
I digress. But Luke, that sounds awesome. And awesome because I think so many of us want to tell our stories, but either don't know how to write or feel uncomfortable. Like it just feels like you can write a memoir and that's what you can do. And this is such a cool way to do all of that, but in a way that feels very uniquely to you, right? Like if you wrote a book, I would read it, but I'd be like, I'd rather hear you deliver it and all the other audio pieces that you're telling me that you're putting in makes it sound awesome. And I like podcasts that are stories over multiple episodes. So you had me at the very beginning when you were like, it's a story, sold, done.
Yeah.
It sounds awesome. I am very
Right.
much looking forward to listening to it.
I'm really enjoying it, and hoping, I've got sort of 20 episodes kind of sketched out. So we'll see how
Yes.
far we can go, obviously, with it.
Oh,
I just hope enough people listen that we get to do more than five.
that's super exciting.
Um,
And I'm not even lying. I'm actually excited about that.
that's great. I'm excited about it too, and it's nice to, talking about telling their stories. I don't think IBD itself is very interesting. Like you're interesting, people are interesting. People dealing with challenges are interesting, and the more, when it comes to telling your stories, you might not think that, the way your parents met is a part of your IBD story, but it totally is. Like that's the stuff that actually, like when you're telling your story, you're creating yourself as a character in that story. And like in any show, we need to care about that character, and we need to be able to see ourselves in them. And so the more that you can kind of attach these universal things, like, well, what were your parents like? What did you love as a kid? What did you want to be? Who did you fall in love with? Like, when was the first time you got your heart broken? Like all of these things that you might have your own very specific personal story of each of those things that's unique to you, but those experiences are universal human experiences, and we're just hardwired to be interested in those stories, because like no one's really figured life out exactly, so we're always open to, oh, you could do that, okay.
Oh, I'm so excited. And I am also really amped that both of us get to do really cool, fun things in the Galley Health app. And to your point, I just want to like toast Galley a little bit that they have been
Yeah.
really big champions of letting people do really creative stuff, which is really awesome. And like you said, doesn't happen a lot. So it's pretty cool that they've
Well,
been a platform for that.
I think one of the coolest things this year, and hats off to you, is that you got up at 3 a.m. to have a Zoom chat with us. And I'm sitting here at my desk in Sydney, and I'm talking to an IBD advocate from Saudi Arabia and another one in Latvia, I think. And I thought, this is so cool. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, this I don't think would have happened without the pandemic. I don't think we would have thought to use Zoom the way that we have this year. And I do think. And I talk about this in the first episode of Chronic, that my experience of being housebound has really made me appreciate lockdown. I mean, we've been pretty lucky over here in Australia. We sort of got on top of it in Sydney pretty quick. But to be able to be housebound and not be sick is, to me, it's like it's sort of utopian. And all of the possibilities it's shown us in terms of remote working and telehealth and the ability to collaborate across, different, like, time and distance is nothing now. We can be connected and we can work globally. And, I think there's a lot of positives that can emerge from this still.
Agree. And a lot of things that I think maybe we would have gotten there, but it would have just taken a lot longer to kind of see what possibilities are available. So yeah, thanks coronavirus. Thanks pandemic,
Yeah.
I guess.
And look, I think like having these sort of authentic conversations as well is very important, because I think the sort of social media that's just driven by memes and little sound bites is really it's shown itself like how much of a problem that is. And again, I've been thinking about when I was sick in my early 20s, how readily I was happy to believe any kind of conspiracy theory, and like, well, the medication that I'm on isn't working. It's because it's big pharma, and it's because my doctors are all corrupt, and really, like, I can find much better cures on the internet from this one person that says it definitely worked for them. And I recognize that now as just a symptom of the anxiety of dealing with a chronic illness. And I think the whole world at the moment with the pandemic is in that mindset. And if they haven't dealt with it before, like, they are responding exactly like I did the first time I realized that, I had a chronic illness. Like, they're responding with anxiety, and anxiety is causing them to think irrationally. And then they're finding lots of ways to have their irrationality kind of validated online. And there are whole communities, 70 odd million of them, of completely irrational people, kind of coming together. And it's important to fight back against that. I think not with shame and not with anger and not with adding to the toxicity, but just having genuine conversations, like real conversations that go beyond being memes and sound bites.
Well, and I think, that's one of the silver linings of being chronically ill is not only, to your point much earlier, of how you kind of look at things a little bit differently, but it's almost like we've done this before, in
Yeah.
terms of the pandemic, of, like you said, isolating or lockdown, or even just uncertainty and feeling hopeless, or all the gamut of emotions and things you go through when you are chronically ill, either in the beginning or throughout your journey. I kind of feel like we're like the enlightened few when it comes to how to handle this, because it's kind of like old hat. It's not a big deal. So if there's a silver lining on it and chronic illness, I think that's it. So you can walk away from this episode feeling like, A, you have never been caught mid shit by riot police, and
Yeah.
B, your chronic illness has really prepared you to handle a pandemic pretty seamlessly, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. All right, Luke, it was fantastic to talk to you. I'm so glad you shared your story with us. I'm so glad that your podcast is coming out soon, because again, I feel like I have to tell you how sincerely excited I am, because like I'm supposed to tell you I'm excited about it, but like I actually really am excited about it. So thanks everybody for tuning in to another episode of Shits and Giggles. I will be back soon with another Aussie guest. It's like three out of four now, all
Oh,
of
who's
you.
that?
Her name is Danny. Do you know her?
Yeah, probably. She's probably a Crohn's Colitis Australia ambassador
Probably. Last
as
week was
well.
Justin, and now you.
Oh,
So
Justin Thing.
yeah.
I
So we
know.
are going to round out the 4 episodes with 3 out of 4 from the other side of the pond. And then I can continue to interview people in my same time zone after that, maybe.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me in my time zone today.
All right, everybody. Have a good one.